So I'm going to focus on basic science for obvious reasons, given my own interests. And I think the first thing I'd start with would be histocompatibility, the definition that actually tissues can be incompatible, and obviously that leading to the development and understanding of the MHC, HLA, and mouse into man, a perfect example of where transplantation has really made a major difference. And all of those data have implications for the wider area, not just for transplantation in autoimmunity, for example, as well as other fields. So that would be my first. My second, obviously, again, leaning to my interests, it has to be Billingham, Brenton, Medawar, and the demonstration that one can manipulate the immune system to induce tolerance actively to antigens that are not part of that individual. And clearly, those experiments have led to a major change in people's thinking, and also to the seminal studies now in clinical transplantation, largely from the Boston group, but obviously the Stanford group and others now also contributing to development of that area. So I think those are my two major things that I would highlight. And then finally, for the third, I would really say immunology, really contributing to our understanding of complexity of mechanisms in transplantation, not only rejection, but also ischemia, reperfusion injury, and so on, that really, although that may not help the clinicians in solving the problem, highlighting the different pathways that can be used by the immune system to attack a transplant, and how those then deviate and move on beyond where they started when we intervene, is also a major contribution for the field. So my answer is yes. Hopefully that's encouraging. But I think it will have to evolve yet again, and largely towards regenerative medicine being incorporated into transplantation. So can we modify tissues that are transplanted to make them either repair themselves and therefore respond, the immune system will respond less aggressively, or other avenues in that direction. So my answer would be yes. I think TTS can play a major role as long as people are willing to broaden their perspectives from what we now use. So I think there were two things that were really key for the society, and one thing that I think I helped initiate. So the two things that I think were absolutely critical for the development of the society into its current existence was the establishment of an independent office for the Transplantation Society in Montreal. We were instrumental in developing that process and actually finding premises that the staff could then occupy. It gave us more independence to make decisions and act on them very fast, which was obviously essential if TTS was going to maintain its position as one of the leading societies in the field. Secondly, the World Transplant Congress, that happened during my presidency, and I think I had a major role to play in making that a success. And obviously TTS was very well received by the international community as contributing to the development of the World Transplant Congress that we're celebrating again in 2014. And then finally, the one thing that I think I implemented during my presidency was the new key opinion leader meetings, actually trying to identify young investigators that are really bringing the data forward but may not have the prominence that they need to fulfill and pursue their careers. And so those meetings, I think, highlighted how young people contribute to the field alongside their mentors, and then really allowed them to assume more prominence in the Transplantation Society of the future. So clearly promoting the science and clinical practice of transplantation has to be the primary mission of TTS, in my opinion. But I think what is important is that we are broadening our involvement of all the professional disciplines that contribute now to this exciting field. And so allowing others to join the society, even though they may not be clinically trained, may not have the obvious professional disciplines that were thought of to be essential even 20 years ago, I think is critically important. So that would be one thing that I think the society is doing well and should continue to develop as the field progresses. and where new initiatives are going to be required to bring other groups in. So I think vascularized composite allografts are really the thing that I would never have predicted would become a clinical reality. And when Max Dubernard won the Medawar Prize for limb and face transplantation, I think that highlighted through his lecture to the whole community just how far that field had come. It's obviously never going to be a mainstream part of clinical transplantation, but it really does highlight the ingenuity and the collaborative nature of the field to allow those procedures to be carried out successfully for the benefit of patients. So I think the liaison that TTS has developed with the WHO has been instrumental in TTS being one of the leaders in trying to prevent organ and donor trafficking around the world. And clearly TTS has a role to play there because of its international mission and can strive to improve current situations over the next 10, 20 years. So I've just chosen one here, and I think the answer to both questions is the same, and that's really stem cells. I think stem cells hold a lot of promise for the field of transplantation, for organ repair, for the construction of simple tissues. But I think when we try and stretch that to rebuilding a kidney, for example, where it's a multicellular complex organ that has multiple functions, then at the moment, stem cells are unlikely to deliver the promise that some people are suggesting they can. I'm not saying it won't be possible in the longer term, but at the moment I think we need to focus on the things that they can do to build confidence so that the field can use and develop that approach for the future. Yeah, so this is actually rather a bizarre answer. So I was a graduate student in biochemistry with somebody called Rodney Porter, who won the Nobel Prize for immunoglobulin structure, and a colleague who was a cellular immunologist called Alan Williams, a very blunt Australian. And I needed a job in Oxford, and so they sent me to see Peter Morris to see whether he had a postdoctoral position that might be suitable for me, because they felt that some basic science was needed up at the John Radcliffe Hospital. And Peter employed me and gave me a lab, and the rest is history. So I think you can really make a difference in this field. I can see some of our own work moving from the laboratory into the clinic. Not maybe the exact idea that we started out with, but really some of the essence of what we were doing in the 1980s now really moving to the clinic. And that for me is very exciting. It means that one interacts with a range of disciplines, that you make great friends and colleagues because you need to talk to one another, and immunology is not the easiest language to understand, and therefore being able to explain that to your colleagues and have them embrace those concepts to me is really exciting. So I'd certainly encourage scientists to do it, but we also need young clinicians who are fired up with enthusiasm and who will think about what we can do better for patients and not just accept the status quo. So I think there are numerous examples of where women have made significant contributions to the field, be they scientists, surgeons, physicians, histocompatibility specialists, and so on. So there's no question that women can contribute and be leaders in the field. I think the issue is that sometimes they're not willing to step forward and contribute to the development, for example, of the society. I think I was fortunate early on that Peter Morris encouraged me to join TTS, or at least stand for election for TTS Council, and probably he was surprised when I got elected. But I was elected and understood a little bit about how council worked, and then for me I could see that I was often the only woman in the room, and yet there were clearly women who could contribute, and so I stood for presidency. Not really thinking that I would be elected, but I was, which was obviously wonderful. I was delighted and hope I made a contribution during my presidency. And then following on from that, obviously the Women in Transplantation Initiative developed really to highlight two women in the field internationally, that they can each make a contribution to the development of field in their own country, but also internationally if they would like to. And I think we've got a fabulous network of women now who are very engaged and who are trying to mentor younger women to jostle all those things that one needs to juggle and make sure that they can not only develop their own career, but also hopefully help the field move forward and become a more prominent constituency within the Transplantation Society. So I think this is something that has been happening informally throughout the lifetime of the Society. But in recent years, it's become clear that internationally, there is a need for people who aren't necessarily working in major centres in the United States or even Europe to have someone that they can speak to in those more developed parts of the world to ask questions about how their career might go, to find clinical centres or research laboratories where they may be accepted for fellowships and so on. And so we started this scheme where people who wanted to have some form of mentoring in transplantation could access a group of volunteers, both in their own country as well as an international group, and select a mentor from each pool. Somebody from their own country who would know about the career issues there, which obviously in Korea are quite different from those in Holland, for example, in the Netherlands, but also somebody internationally who might be able to advise them more generally on how careers develop outside their own country. And that scheme's been working quite well. I think it's been very successful for those that want to participate. And it means that people meet up at the congresses, they have coffee together, they can phone up, they can use Skype, just to talk through things that are challenging them as they develop their careers.